Goeienaand, ons kuier vanaand hierso saam met News24 se Book of the Month, Behind Prison Walls, Unlocking a Safer South Africa. Ek gaan nou die skrywers voorstel. Ek wil net eerstens baie dankie sê aan die uitgewers om hier te wees. Netwerk 24 wat ons saam met julle kan kuier. En dan gaan ek sommer aan my regterkant begin. Regter, dit is 'n voorreg om met jou te praat. Ek weet nie hoe ek jou vandag aanspreek nie, en dan as jy net jou en jou twee kollegas kan voorstel vir ons en dan elkeen net ietsie van hulle self sê. Baie welkom.
Uitstekend, Stefans. Groot plesier om met jou te wees op hierdie platform en dankie ook vir jou tyd. Jy het gesê jy gaan vir ons vra, maar ons het ook 'n paar vrae vir jou want ons stel belang in jou ervarings. My mede-auteurs is Rebecca Gore, wat nou glimlag. Sy was my navorsingsassistent gewees by die inspektoraat vir tronke, waar ek na my aftrede in 2019 aangestel is, en haar opvolger was Sohela Surajpal, en soos ek gesê het by die boekbekendstelling in Rosebank by Exclusive Books, hulle het die grootste deel van die werk gedoen, en die enigste rede hoekom hulle name nie voor my naam verskyn op die boek nie, is die Griekse alfabet.
Baie dankie vir dit. En dan net vir Rebecca en Sohela. Ek hoop ek pronounce your name good. Kan julle net ons iets vertel van julle self? Die regter is wel bekend, laat ons luisteraars net, ons kykers net bietjie weet wie julle is.
Thanks, Stefan. So I'm Sohela, and I am Justice Cameron's law clerk at the Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services, where I help with research. Just today, we went together on a prison inspection in Heidelberg. Rebecca?
Hi, Stefans. Thank you so much. So I'm Rebecca Gore. As Judge mentioned, I'm his former legal researcher at the Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services. I'm currently a pupil advocate at the Cape Bar, and I'm also a research associate at the Centre for Law and Society at the University of Cape Town.
Stefans, hier inkom soos 'n regterlike boelie, alhoewel ek nie meer 'n regter is nie, en dit slaan ook op jou navraag. My naam buite die hof is asseblief Edwin. Ek wil net sê dat hulle albei regtig briljant is. Rebecca het 'n briljante LLM by Harvard onlangs voltooi, voordat die Trump administrasie dit moeilik gemaak het vir mense soos sy om daar te studeer. En voor dit het sy briljante honneurs en 'n LLB en 'n BA by UCT gedoen. En ewe briljant is Sohela. Sohela is 'n internasionale debatsvoerder waar sy pryse gewen het namens Suid-Afrika. Sy het uitstekend gevaar in haar LLB en toe haar LLM by Tukkies. En sy, soos Rebecca, beide van hulle het klaar gepubliseer in akademiese joernale. En dit spreek vanself dat ek onuitspreeklik trots is dat hulle ingestem het om saam met my aan die boek te werk.
En dan die groot vraag aan enigeen van julle drie. Hoekom 'n boek oor die tronk?
Rebecca?
So Stefans, through the work I was doing with the Judicial Inspectorate and with Edwin, which required us to go in and inspect prisons across South Africa, we had so many deep and visceral and important experiences that we would constantly reflect on, especially driving to and from the prisons. At the same time, part of the job required us to do quite a lot of extensive research in understanding prisons, prison regulations, understanding other more nuanced issues. A practice that Edwin started was to write op-eds. And so over time, through op-eds, through guest lectures, through responding to concerns of inmates, we accumulated quite a lot of research. And we had this idea to say, why don't we take what we are experiencing, these visceral, important experiences that not many people do experience in South Africa, not many people do get access into our prisons, and take all this research that we've generated and put together and try to package it into one piece of work that is accessible and readable. And whether you are someone who has never thought about prisons to whether you're a prison expert or a judge, this book is for you. And of course, for inmates and for families and for victims and survivors of crime. So it really was this based on our personal experiences, based on what we were learning, what we were thinking about, how can we share this with the public?
And I think on top of that, we had this experience where we thought that so many of the worst things that happen in prisons happen because they're shrouded in mystery, they're shut off and isolated from our communities. And so if we could, and that's why the Judicial Inspectorate does the work it does, it tries to shine a light on those conditions, it tries to report on them to the public. But we thought a book would be so much more accessible, and it would bring our experiences and our ideas and the reality of life in prisons to a broader public. And we often find that people who know what happens in prisons, people who work in prisons or have themselves been incarcerated, are much more likely to agree with the kind of reforms that we think are so important, because they understand the consequences of our disastrous missteps in policy as a country. And so this was our way of making those realities more accessible to everyone.
En mag ek byvoeg, Stefans, asseblief, vir my alles wat Rebecca en Suella gesê het, stem ek mee saam. Ek sal byvoeg dat vir my is ons tronke tekenend van 'n breër probleem in Suid-Afrika. Kom ons begin by die grondwet. Die grondwet waarborg vir elke persoon wat aangehou word, of jy gevonnis is of nie gevonnis is nie, toestande wat ooreenkom met menswaardigheid. Die menslike waardigheid is die kern van ons hele grondwet. Nou, dit word dan vervat in die 1998 tronkewet wat Mandela deurgestuur het. En daar is ook die reg. So ons begin by 'n baie hoë reg, 'n baie mooi gestelde reg. Elke aangehoude persoon, het die reg op menswaardigheid. Maar wat is die werklikheid? Ons was vanoggend, soos Suella gesê het, by 'n nogal 'n goeie tronk, die Heidelberg tronk. Dit is klein, dit is oorbevolk, net 800 mense, dit word baie goed bestuur. Die probleem word beredder deur 'n attente en getroue personeel. Maar in meeste van ons tronke gaan dit nie so goed nie. Maar die belangrike punt van ons boek, Stefans, en dit is waar ons weer terugkom by die breër implikasies van ons boek, is daar geen probleme is in die tronke nie, en geen probleme in ons land is nie, wat ons nie deur ons eie toegewydheid, ons vasberadenheid, onder goeie leierskap kan regmaak nie. Ons tronke kan beter word, ons kan misdaad bekamp, ons kan die moordsyfer afbring, ons kan al ons instellings, die nasionale vervolgingsgesag waar advokaat Shamila Betoy verskriklik onder die loop was die afgelope 2 weke, die polisie, wat ek glo, en ons sê dit in die boek ook, wanbestuur word, sedert Zuma het dit sedert 2011 verskriklik afgebreek, afgetakel, misdaadsintelligensie, die vervolgingsgesag, ook die polisie. Nie een van daardie probleme kan ons nie vandag begin beredder nie, begin verbeter nie, om vir ons die land te skep waar ons almal in wil leef.
Baie dankie. Julle het sommer my tweede vraag ook lekker geantwoord. Ek wil gou 'n stukkie lees uit die boek uit, op bladsy 92, en julle noem dit vroeër in die boek ook, waar president Nelson Mandela gesê het, "No one truly knows a nation until one has been inside its jails. A nation should not be judged by how it treats its highest citizens, but its lowest ones." En dit het half die fokus geword van die boek vir my, veral van hoofstuk 4 of 5 af. Regter, ek net gevra, jou geskiedenis vroeg in die boek was vir my baie interessant hier in 1976. As jy net so kyk.
Ja, ek doen dit graag, Stefans, en ek sal nog verder teruggaan. Na 26 jaar vroeër, toe my sussie verongeluk het, my 12-jarige sussie, ek was 7 jaar oud gewees, maar die ergste was dat ons 3 kinders was in 'n kindertuis op Queenstown, maar my pa was in die tronk vir diefstal, motordiefstal, en so my belang by gevangenisse kom uit my binneste uit. En toe ek as jong student op Stellenbosch net voordat ek Oxford toe is op 'n Rhodes Scholarship, het ek toe my eerste tronk binne gegaan. En dit was vir my 'n vreeslik ontroerende, maar ook ontstellende en ervaring wat my laat dink het. En dit het uiteindelik daartoe gelei dat ek ampte aanvaar toe die minister van Justisie en president Ramaphosa my gevra het. So ek dink dit is die volkome antwoord.
Die doodstraf het nie mense afgeskrik nie, uit persoonlike ondervinding wat ek gehoor het, en dit is baie duidelik uit die statistieke op bladsy 72 dat lewenslank dit nie doen nie. Waar lê die oplossing vir ons in die probleem van die hoë misdaadsyfer? En ek sal graag die regter dit wil antwoord.
Cool. Dis 'n baie goeie vraag, Stefans, en ek antwoord dit graag. Wat ons verseker weet is, soos jy met jou inleiding gesê het, as die doodstraf gewerk het, sou daar 'n redenasie, 'n argument daarvoor gewees het. Ons weet uit herhaalde navorsingsstudies, empiriese studies van die 19de eeu af, die voorverlede eeu af, weet ons dat dit nie werk nie. Dit skrik mense nie af nie, dit bring nie die moordsyfer af nie. Wat wel die moordsyfer afbring, is 'n amper kinderlike les, gevolge, consequences. Jy leer vir jou kleuter dat daar consequences is, dat daar gevolge is vir wangedrag of verkeerde besluite of vir dwaase besluite. En ons het in 2011 met die Zuma regering het ons begin om konsekwensies, gevolge af te breek. Zuma het in 2011 misdadiger, meneer Richard Mdluli, as hoof van misdaadintelligensie aangestel. Hoekom? Omdat hy die gevolge van sy eie dade wou vermy. Hy het ook onbevoegde en sommige mense met groot skadies in die vervolgingsgesag aangestel. En hy het mense, ewe skadieagtige mense in die polisie aangestel. Alles om daardie instellings op hulle knieë te laat kom, sodat hy nie die gevolge van sy eie dade moes nie. So wat is die antwoord? Stefans, jy vra so 'n mooi vraag. Kom ons bou misdaadintelligensie op. Dit kan die koöperatiefstal diewe bekamp. Dit kan die mense wat Transnet se spore en elektrisiteitslyne, die mense wat die kontantmasjiene opblaas, die mense wat ontvoerings pleeg. Daar's met goeie misdaadintelligensie kan jy 'n groot deel van die misdaadsgolf in Suid-Afrika bekamp. Ten tweede, gevolge begin by inligting, dan moet daar polisieering wees, effektiewe, aktiewe polisieering. Die polisie is in die toestand waarin hulle tans is, vanweë 'n gebrek aan inspirasionele leiding. Sit iemand aan die hoof van die polisie wat onbesmet is met verdagtheid en bou die polisie op. En dan derde, wat Shamila Betoy vir die afgelope 6-7 jaar naarstiglik probeer het, bou die vervolgingsgesag ook op. Daar is absoluut duidelik dat daar lapse was aan die vervolgingsgesag se optredes, en dit kan ook geremedieer word. So dis 'n lang antwoord, maar dis 'n tweeledige antwoord. Ja, lang tronkstrawwe, lewenslange gevangenisstraffe help nie. Jy moet gevolge hê, al is dit korter gevangenisstraffe, moet jy elke persoon wat 'n verkrachting pleeg of 'n misdaad pleeg, 'n moord pleeg, moet jy opvolg, en dan kan jy dit effektief bestry.
Baie, sê maar.
And I'd add to the long answer by saying that those are, of course, true, and those are changes that need to happen within the criminal justice system. But we also explore in the book the idea that there are changes outside of criminal justice that we need to prevent crime and to prevent harm. We know that we're an incredibly unequal country. We know that we're a country with very high levels of poverty, of unemployment, that some communities in our country struggle because of the gang violence and a culture of gangs and histories of violence. And so we think that part of preventing crime, besides fixing policing and prosecuting and detective work, is fixing our communities and our societies and making sure that people have access to the things that they need to live good lives, decent lives that don't push them towards crime and criminality. So high quality education and access to healthcare, including mental health care and addiction services. And so there are a whole other range of societal fixes that we desperately need as well.
Okay, my next question is this. In die boek kom dit baie duidelik dat die gewone mense skram van misdaad weg. Ons is te bang, julle stel dit so mooi, we are angry, we are scared, we find it difficult, die complicate reform and let alone, en dan gaan ons aan. Ek wil weet, wat kan ons as 'n gemeenskap doen om hande te vat om dit te maak werk? Want dit is duidelik dat dit nie net 'n tronkprobleem is nie.
Rebecca, Suhela, what can we do as communities, as society, to improve the situation?
Well, I think, so what I've just said is we have these broader societal reforms that we desperately need and that we all need to care about and work towards and hold our government to account to provide. But I think another level of that is, well, what can we as a community do, not just to fix crime, but to fix prisons? And it can seem like a hard question because prisons are so inaccessible and it doesn't seem like we all have power over them. But what we track in this book is that many of our problems with prisons, especially sentence inflation, which has led to overcrowding in our prisons, have been the result of public fears and how those have influenced our lawmakers and our policymakers. And so I think that if people care about this issue and read our book and make it clear that this is an issue that people care about and want fixes to beyond harsh sentences, beyond more punitive approaches to bail or parole, then we could see more systemic changes from our policymakers and from our lawmakers as well. It goes back to what we said at the beginning, that a lot of abuse that happens in prisons happens because nobody looks and nobody cares to look. And I think if we were to turn our eyes towards this problem, we might see that change.
The reason I'm asking is sometimes it's more difficult for someone who was long in prison to find a job. En dan voel dit dat die gemeenskap wil nie die gevangenes buite hê nie, maar hoe as ons 'n gemeenskap, as mense in die hande vat nie. Ek is vandag waar ek is weens geleenthede, maar alle gevangenes kry nie dieselfde geleenthede nie.
And I would add to some points that Suhela's mentioned about holding our politicians accountable. When we think about the 2024 elections, I recall seeing many signs by politicians saying if they elected, they will bring back the death penalty, they will be tough on crime. And so one point that we try to get across in the book, and I'm saying this from what our civic duty can be, is to hold our politicians accountable and say, don't try to do a quick fix yet again. We need to follow the evidence. We need to really understand what can deal with the root causes of crime and violence, and ask our politicians, or rather demand our politicians, consider those roots and not just the same mistake time and time again. So while we understand that the public is justifiably frustrated and angry and horrified at the state of crime and violence in South Africa, we expect our elected politicians to do more. And Stefans, what you mentioned now at the micro level, I agree. I think there's so much we could do day to day, whether it is trying to engage with people who have spent time in prison. I know there was a cafe, I'm not sure if it's still around, called Gangster Cafe in Cape Town, where they would hire formerly incarcerated people, teach them to be baristas. And I know abroad, there are other various coffee companies that actually have specific programs directed at hiring people who have spent time incarcerated, and to try to overcome what is called the collateral consequences of incarceration. So I think there's a level where we should demand more from our politicians, but also a level where we should be less judgmental, more open-minded, and try to create an environment where people who have spent time in prison and want and deserve a second chance, that we can support them in getting those second chances.
Ek sê, Stefans, indien ek mag, dit kom neer op medemenslikheid, humanity. En waarvan jy gepraat het, waar mense jou nie in diens van neem nie, maar jy nietemin geleenthede gehad het en waar jy nou is, waar jy 'n openbare figuur is, waar jy werk doen, advocacy work, kom van medemenslikheid. Ons moet besef, ek moet besef, ek is nie so anders as iemand wat misgetrap het nie. We are not so different. Jy word nie deur 'n misdaad te pleeg nie. Dit is ook in die geval van jou, jy word nie 'n ander tipe mens nie. You don't become a different kind of human. En as ons binne onsself kan sien dat ons almal in staat daartoe is om wanstappe te pleeg en om misdade te pleeg, en dat ander mense wat wel wanstappe geneem het, hulle is ewe in staat om daarvan af weg te stap, soos jy ook gedoen het, en binne hulle self tot ander insigte te kom. So it's a question of understanding both ourselves and our humanity in other people. Dit klink na baie daar bo in die wolke, maar is baie prakties, en ek dink dit is ook die geval in jou lewe gewees, Stefans, as ek dit mag sê.
Ja, baie dankie, regte. Dit is so, ek het nogal agtergekom die boek Die Menslikheid deur julle al drie kom baie deel. Daar's stukke wat ek gelees het vir my vrou, en ek wil graag, daar's 'n paar, maar hier's 'n stuk wat mens min oor praat op bladsy 147. Can prisoners rehabilitate rapists? When rape is part of a prison culture. Worse, when those imprisoned for petty offense are exposed to sexual violence, what do they take back to the communities? Hoe voel julle drie oor ons minister se sigbaarheid wat positief na buite straal?
Dit is 'n mooi vraag. Die minister, ons was saam gewees by 'n geleentheid by die VN, Vrydag, waar dit die 10-jarige herdenking was van die Nelson Mandela reëls vir gevangenes en gevangenes. En die minister het vir my prontuit gesê ons verskil. Ek het baie respek vir hom. Hy's 'n baie bekwame man. Hy is toegewyd aan sy werk en ons respekteer mekaar, maar ek dink die minister is bietjie straf, Stefans. Ek het dit ook met hom geopper Vrydag in New York City. Hy's bietjie straf gewees. Sohela, you can give the stats. Die minister het voor hom gehad wat hy geërf het by sy voorganger, minister Lamola, het hy etlike honderde aansoeke vir parol gehad van mense wat tot lewenslang gevangenskap gevonnis is. En ek het vir hom gesê, maar minister, hulle parol is goedgekeur deur 'n raad wat voorgesit word deur 2 regters, en in 90% van die gevalle, Sohela, is hulle geweier. En die minister het dit toe erken, en ek het toe vir hom verder gesê, daar's nie 'n paroolstelsel in die wêreld wat nie ook herhalings het van misdadigheid nie. So jy kan nie 'n perfekte paroolstelsel bewerk wat geen ontploffings gaan hê nie. So you can probably recall the figures of ministers refusing parole, which I raised with him on Friday in New York City.
Yes, so when we collected these figures, the minister had considered 385 parole applications for people sentenced to life, and he had approved only 24 of those, which we determined worked out to about a 6% approval rate. And when we go to prisons, prisons that house lifers, we are always confronted by complaints, not just from the inmates, but from the officials too, who tell us that it is a nightmare, that they are working with these inmates, they are helping them with their parole applications. Inmates have completed the rehabilitative programs that they were asked to complete. They've worked with psychologists and social workers, and then they are continuously rejected. And it has a massive impact on life in prison. Something we say in the book is that one of the drivers of overcrowding and the growth of the prison population has been the boom in the number of people sentenced to life, and the fact that those people sentenced to life are spending longer and longer periods in prison. And that's partly because of decisions our lawmakers have made, but in this case, it's also because of decisions that a figure like the minister makes.
En ons sal net herhaal, as ek mag, Stefans, dat die paroolaansoeke wat die minister geweier het, is paroolaansoeke wat 2 regters en 'n hele raad van deskundiges na onderhoude, nadat hulle die families aangehoor het, goedgekeur het. So, dis dit, jy het gevra oor die minister, jy het gevra dat ek my kop onder die valbuie moet sit, ek het dit nou gedoen, ek sal graag hoor wat Rebecca ook dink.
Yes, I think these issues are so complex and interesting because I think a lot of the time we think of, especially the beginning of the Supreme Constitutional era, and we think of the judgment S.V. Makwanyane handed down by the Constitutional Court that effectively abolished the death penalty. But I think what many people don't realize is that through that abolishment, we ended up too readily granting sentences of life imprisonment and what impact that has had on our prison population. And so our book does discuss that. And we also share some really important research put together by Dirk van Zyl-Smits and Catherine Appleton, who have done a global study of life imprisonment around the world. And these stats are in the book, but we identify that South Africa has one of the highest rates of lifers in prison, and how that has skyrocketed since 1995. So this is a really important issue that through our book we hope to bring to light and to show exactly what my co-authors have mentioned, this issue of sentencing inflation. So we are incarcerating more and more people for longer and longer sentences, and that is inevitably a recipe for a disaster that is then put on the prison department to handle. And so it's these issues that we really need to think about, and again think about what are the root causes of crime. And if we're only focusing on mass incarceration and sentencing inflation, what about that starting point before that person enters the prison system?
I'll add one more.
Excuse, say hello.
I'll add one more thing about our minister, which is that, and it's on life or parole as well, which is that part of the reason we were so interested in those figures and how many profiles he'd approved or rejected was that he inherited a massive backlog from the previous minister. The problem we had under the previous administration was that life or paroles would take months, sometimes years to be considered, and by the time the minister made a decision, the information inside those profiles was outdated, and they would be sent back to inmates who would have to redo the same programs they'd already completed again. They would need to get new social worker reports or new psychologist reports. And Minister Groenewald eradicated that backlog. He worked through all of the profiles that were on his and his predecessor's desk. So he's been remarkably effective in many ways, but we do, as Justice Cameron says, have certain principled opposition to some of his decisions and some of his approaches while recognizing his efficacy.
Stefans, ek wou vir jou vraag vra, maar ek eers ons boek het baie syfers, maar die hoofargument gaan nie oor syfers nie, dit gaan oor mensdom en die menslikheid. Maar ek wil een syfer gee. 1995, die Konstitusionele Hof het sopas die doodstraf afgelas. Ons het in die hele land het ons 495 mense wat lewenslang tronkstraf toegedien is. Vandag, soos ons hier opneem, hier vanaand, soos ons luisteraars by ons aansluit, is dit 18,000 plus. So daar's 'n geweldige toename, en ek wil iets byvoeg by wat Rebecca gesê het. Sy sê, ons stuur meer en meer mense vir langer en langer periodes tronk toe, maar 'n kleiner en kleiner aandeel van die mense wat misdaad pleeg op die oomblik. Dis 'n tweede skokkende statistiek wat ek wil vir ons luisteraars en kykers vanaand wil gee. 11% van die wat moord pleeg word deurgevolg tot skuldig bevinding. So as jy 'n moord pleeg vanaand, het jy 'n 89% kans om nie tot vervolging what is conviction in Afrikaans? Skuldig bevinding. Jammer dat my Afrikaans my in die steek gelaat het. So, a smaller and smaller percentage of those who commit crimes are going to prison for longer and longer. Dis presies die teenoorgestelde wil ons sê. Nou mag ek my vraag vir jou vra, Stefans, as ek mag. Ek stel belang in die feit dat jy vanaand saam met ons deel is van ons uitsaai en jy vra vir ons die vrae, jy vra as iemand wat self skuldig bevind is aan 'n misdaad, wat self tyd in die tronk deurgebring het. Ek wil vir jou vra, in watter mate het dit jou geaffekteer en in watter mate het die feit dat jy hoop gehad het om vrygestel te word en vanaand vry is, in watter mate het dit vir jou beïnvloed?
Regtig baie dankie vir die vraag. Ek dink dit sou makliker gewees het as ek vroeër geweet het ek gaan definitief huis toe wanneer ek huis toe gaan. Ons word nie voorberei jy gaan huis toe nie. Dit was skielik gewees, ek het dit nie verwag nie. En toe ek uitkom met die syfer van gevangenes wat teruggaan, was ek altyd bang ek wou nie 'n statistiek word nie. En ek het toe begin soek na 'n rolmodel, maar daar was nie 'n lifer wat suksesvol was nie. Na wie kyk jy op? Wie gee vir jou hoop dat jy dit gaan maak? En met maak bedoel ek nie net nooit terug tronk toe gaan nie. Ek bedoel 'n suksesvolle besigheidsman, 'n suksesvolle man, 'n pa, 'n man dat jy inpas in so 'n mate dat jy later vergeet jy was in die tronk. Die eerste 4 jaar, 5 jaar was verskriklik moeilik. Ek het met 'n skuldgevoel gelewe wat ek nie kon afkry nie. 'n Vriend van my is 'n mentor en ons het begin werk aan my skuldgevoel wat in die tronk ingeplant is. Daai stigma wat aan jou kleef. En dit was eers toe ek aan dit begin werk het, toe ek kan sien dat ek in my lewe buite groei om ek kry nie meer tronk nagmerries nie. Soms vergeet ek is 'n bandiet. Ek bedoel nie dat ek nog met parol moet inteken nie. Hulle doen huisbesoek. Maar in my vrou en my kind verhouding het ek dit afgegaan en dan die gemeenskap het begin regtig hande vat om my 'n tweede kans te gee. En ek sou graag wou hê dat meer lifers daai kans moet kry wat ek gehad het.
Baie dankie, dis baie insiggewend, Stefans. Dankie. I don't know if Rebecca or Sahela want to comment on that. That's a very moving attestation of the importance of flexibility and the affirmation of everyone's potential for rehumanization, for re-entry, for regrowth.
I would maybe add that similar to the story you've shared with us, Stefans, which I'm very grateful for, we heard at our book launch in Rosebank from Glenn Mayer, who was also sentenced, I don't remember the year he was sentenced in, Judge, I think you know.
89.
Exactly, and he received a life sentence, but when he was released,
sentence, sorry.
Sorry, oh, okay. But he received a very long sentence and he was fortunate enough to be released and to rebuild his life and to have support and to become very successful in his personal and his professional life. But he made the point, an incredibly impactful point, that if he had been sentenced under the legislation that exists now that governs how parole works, he would only have been released, I think, this year, or he would not even have yet been released. And all of the incredible work he's done to rebuild his life and to be a productive, responsible member of society would never have happened. And so that's just to say that rebuilding one's life is possible, but it's an opportunity that we're denying to so many people who are being sentenced either to life or to very long sentences now, because we are making them serve more and more of those sentences before they become eligible for parole.
And I'll briefly add a point that we mentioned in the book, and we gave some thought into making sure our closing chapters, it's in the title as well, the importance of hope. And the importance of when one is incarcerated, when one is granted a lengthy sentence, when one has committed a truly awful crime and is trying to improve themselves, trying to come out of the system better, trying to have sufficient rehabilitation, trying to be a good citizen, that there is some level of hope as both a moral entitlement. One should always hope and strive to be better, and the system itself should provide those opportunities and provide for some hope. And so life imprisonment, lengthy sentences, these systems owe individuals some form of hope that if they really and truly work on themselves and they really and truly can come out the system better, that those opportunities can really work. And so just that point of hope and this idea of the right to hope that we picked up on from some European case law.
En dan voordat ons wil uiteraard weer vir julle herinner, julle luister na die gesprek voor Behind Prison Walls en julle moet die boek gaan koop, Baken Books, Exclusive Books, moenie vergeet nie. Ek wil graag afsluit met 'n gedagte. Watse lesse het julle geleer oor reformers, en sorry dat ek nie nou die woord in Afrikaans kan onthou nie. Hervorming.
Lesse, Rebecca, Sohela, oor lessons about reform of the system, bedoel jy, Stefans, of van die mense?
Ek dink die einde het julle so 'n hele paar goedjies genoem oor reformers wat vir my nogal interessant was met julle studies. Ek kan nou nie vinnig die bladsy kry nie, maar net so rolweg oor dit, want ek dink mens moet opnuut na die stelsel kyk, soos wat julle gedoen het.
Uitstekend. Rebecca, wil jy begin en dan Sohela? Dan sal ek.
Yes, so this idea of lessons for reform and going forward. So you will note that our book, we have a very chunky chapter on reforms because we really didn't want this book to be doom and gloom. This is the problem. We wanted to say there's actually a myriad of solutions that are out there. Some can be done overnight. Some takes many, many years where we'll only see the results later on. But we wanted to empower people to know that there's options out there, that together we can really change our prison system and change the way we respond to crime and violence. But one thing I wanted to add, and I hope that this is a common thread throughout our reforms that we put forward, is the importance of accountability. I don't think that we're saying that people shouldn't be held accountable and they shouldn't be, and I know Judge mentioned this earlier, consequences, that there must be consequences for bad behavior. There must be consequences for inflicting violence and harm on people and on communities. But the question is, what kind of accountability actually works? What kind of accountability deters crime, deters violence? And so various of our reforms grapple with that and try to put some options forward. Off the top of my head, some of the recommendations we deal with is trying to deal with overcrowding. That's one of the biggest issues that continue to face our prisons and have faced our prisons since I believe the late 90s through that judge, one of the first inspecting judges, Judge Fagan, who followed after, I think it was Judge Trengo. He was the second inspecting judge, and we often turn to his reports that speak about overcrowding as a major issue. And so various of our reforms try to deal with overcrowding, too many awaiting trial detainees, too many sentenced individuals in our prisons.
And can I net byvoeg, sorry Sarah, please come in, and then I want to add about minimum sentences and drugs and overcriminalization. Those are the points that I will make. But Sarah, please come in.
Those are very similar to the points I wanted to make. but I think Rebecca's very right to say that we have a very long, I think it's our longest chapter on reforms, and it's sort of divide, there are two camps of reforms. Those are the reforms that happen inside prison to improve the experiences of people who we send to prison to make sure they are being treated humanely. And those reforms are important because most people in prison will someday be released. They will rejoin society at some point. That's the point, allegedly, of prison. And we don't think that we can have effective rehabilitation or improvement or reflection in prisons if people are being treated inhumanely. It's a point you made earlier, Stefans, about how people in prisons endure things like sexual violence or assault, or just the complete stripping away of their autonomy. And so those reforms, we discuss many. We speak about how we need to end solitary confinement in our prisons and how we can address violence in our prisons, how healthcare in prisons needs to be made independent, how we need to improve the way we treat certain vulnerable groups like women or LGBTQ+ inmates. And then we look at reforms that need to happen outside of prisons to fix our criminal justice system, fix policing, fix detective work so that we're sending people to prison who need to be there for our safety as a society. We need to fix sentencing so that we're not punishing people disproportionately. We need to fix healthcare and education and all sorts of other systems in our society. And the last thing I want to say, I think an important lesson about reform is the importance of restorative justice, which I think, Stefans, you might also want to say something about, because I understand it's been an important part of your journey as well. Restorative justice is a part of correctional services at the moment. The department tries to organize victim-offender dialogues, although victims aren't always willing to participate. They attempt to implement restorative justice, but we think it should play an even bigger part in our justice system, that justice has a punitive element for perhaps good reason, but it should also involve making amends and repairing the harm one has done to one's community and repairing those bonds between people and their families and their communities.
I think Stefans, as ek net mag opsom, ek stem met alles saam wat Suhela en Rebecca gesê het. Daar is onmiddellike goed wat ons kan doen, soos die afskaffing van minimumvonnisse. Byvoorbeeld, moenie aan dink aan moord en verkrachting nie. Dink aan finansiële misdade, waarvoor daar nou 'n minimum 15 jaar vonnis is. Dink aan dwelmverkope, wat President Kgalema Motlanthe sê, behoort nie gekriminaliseer te word, en daar behoort nie strafregtelike boetes te wees vir dwelms nie. En ek stem daarmee saam, ek stem van harte saam. Daar moet gevolge wees vir dwelmmisbruik, maar dit is 'n openbare gesondheidskrisis, dit is nie 'n misdaadskrisis. Daar is goed wat ons onmiddellik kan doen, stappe wat ons onmiddellik kan neem om die tronke se oorbevolking te verminder, en dan staan die langer termyn goed wat Rebecca en Suhela ook genoem het. Maar die kernles daar is dat ons dit aan onsself verskuldig is as Suid-Afrikaners, wit en swart, en ons is dit aan onsself verskuldig om al ons instellings beter te maak, en ons kan begin by dit wat voor ons lê elke dag. Dit is nie 'n wanhopige stryd nie, dit is 'n stryd met hoop. Ons het getoon in ons land met AIDS, dat ons antiretrovirale middels aan almal beskikbaar kan stel. En dit is deur Zaki Ahmad en die Treatment Action Campaign en uiteindelik die regering gedoen. So daar is krisisse van lewe en dood wat, as ons die regte leierskap het en die regte stappe neem en die regte middele benut, dat ons aan bande kan lê en ons kan suksesvol beter doen.
Baie dankie. Ek gaan graag wil afsluit. Ek moet net vir die kykers onthou Behind Prison Walls kan jy oral gaan koop. En ek sal graag weet, as 'n laaste opsomming oor julle, wie dink julle moet graag die boek lees? Want ek dink van die mense wil hom lees uit nuuskierigheid, maar sommige mense moet hom lees.
Rebecca, Suhela?
So Stefans, I think we, as we may have mentioned earlier, we carefully wrote the book so that it would be accessible, but that it was also rigorous enough that it would really fit the whole spectrum of different readers. As we said, someone who's never thought about prisons to someone who perhaps is a judge in the criminal division and is dealing with this every single day. So I think what I would like to echo is for people who have never thought about prisons and never sort of thinks of prisons as this faraway place that doesn't necessarily impact them, a scary place that only bad people go to, for them to really read this book and to think differently and open-mindedly. And I think something Suhela mentioned earlier, which is, and I think this is why our title of the book is what it is, because our prisons aren't faraway, closed-off places. The evils in prison, whether it's healthcare, whether it's violence, whether it's sexual violence, impact all of us every day. And so trying to break this this very carefully constructed idea that prisons are far away. And so I would love for someone who's never thought about these issues and understandably and statistically probably are victims and survivors of crime, that maybe were part of a trial, part of reporting a crime to the police, but weren't really sure what happened after that. I hope that they would read this book and find it insightful, but also with a lot of humility and care for the complex issues we deal with.
And I think I agree. And Rebecca made this point at our book launch, which is that really we hope everybody reads this book, because most South Africans have been affected by crime personally in some way or the other, on one side of the issue or the other. And many of us know or ourselves have been affected by serious crime or by violent crime. And so we are angry, we are frustrated, but we've really only been having one side of the conversation, which is about being tougher on crime and tougher on criminals. And what we're hoping is that everyone can read this book and can think about what actually makes us safer as a society, and about how we should treat the people that are locked up in our name, and what treating them without dignity or inhumanely might say about us as a society. And then, of course, we also hope that decision makers and lawmakers and parliamentarians and the minister and the national commissioner will read this book and will agree with us. And we've been trying to get as many of them as possible copies.
My collega regter Lee Bazelek het vir ons gister geskryf en die boek aangeprys en gesê hy dink elke regter en elke lid van die Volksraad en van die Nasionale Raad van Provinsies behoort dit te lees. En ek sou net byvoeg dat ek dink enigiemand wat hoop het op ons land, en ek dink ons het almal hoop op ons land, en almal wat glo dat hulle eie bydra, hulle eie agentskap, agency in English, kan bydra tot die heropbouing van ons land en die versterking van ons land se instellings en die versterking van ons land se menslikheid. Ek glo dit almal wat daarin glo, die boek kan en moet lees.
Baie dankie, was lekker met julle gesels. So Hella, I didn't skip your answer. The question you had about the VOD, I left it for last. I wanted to cover the questions. Out of my personal experience, I feel that VOD, victor offender dialogue, must be compulsory. And with that, I'm not only referring now to inmates, but I think in South Africa we need to talk more about each other. Ek dink ons moet baie meer met mekaar praat oor die verlede, oor goed wat ons verskil. Toe ek die slagoffers ontmoet het, toe ek 'n dieper kyk in my misdaad gekyk, maar ek het ook die honger gesien dat ons nooit oor apartheid gepraat het nie. En miskien is dit tyd dat ons dit doen, veral met die 49 vlugtelinge, dat ons die boek ook as 'n raamwerk gebruik na prison binne ons.
Thank you, Stefan.
Baie dankie. En onthou dat julle ingeskakel is op Netwerk 24. Ons het gesels met regter Edwin Kamen, Rebecca Gore, Hella. Can you please pronounce your surname? You can buy the book Behind Prison Walls. I'm not going to try that, but please buy the book. There's mine like soos 'n inkleerboek. Ek dink is 'n moet lees in 'n tyd waar ons nodig het om met mekaar te praat. Baie dankie.
Dankie almal.
Thanks everyone.
Totsiens.